Hello, hi. Um, my name is Dan. I am a GFR Mitra from Southampton. Um, I have been involved with Taratna now and Buddhism since 2018. I asked for ordination in 2001. And I'm also part of the Taratna Fathers team. I have a wife, Sarah, and two daughters, Maggie and Edie. Maggie is aged 8, and Edie is aged 5. I'm talking to you today from my shrine room at home in the Fair Oak area. It's just a little village outside Southampton. And I'm talking to you from my shrine room, which currently doubles up actually as a garage. It's a bit of a work in progress at the moment. Right, I wanted to talk today and make this video to share a recent personal experience of mine. It's an experience of, if I'm honest, great difficulty, an experience of immense suffering, pain and anguish. But within that pain and suffering, there's also an experience of beauty, kindness, an experience of Sangha. So just to start, I suppose at the beginning, towards the end of November last year, in fact it was the 27th of November exactly, I suffered a complete mental health breakdown. This breakdown came as the result of a number of things building up throughout the year, last year, but it all came to a head following a house move to this house where I'm in now. The move itself went very smoothly. However, shortly after moving in, following a period of rain during the night, I had this urge to suddenly go up into our loft and just check our roof, I suppose. And I discovered that our roof was in fact leaking. This came as a massive shock, and due to the expectations I had placed upon this house in the months or year that the months that followed, the expectations were that this house would solve a lot of my problems, and I took this discovery really badly, as I'm sure many other people in my situation would have done. It was quite a shock, and after investigation, my wife and I, getting roofers out to have a look, were pretty much told that we needed a brand new roof, and this would cost us around £18,000. So in the days that followed, the works on the roof started very quickly. But on the 27th of November, following another night of heavy rain, and the day before, or that day, our roofers had removed all the old tiles off of our house, and we were left with the just the felt sort of underneath, and they would come very early in the morning to start putting the new tiles on. I woke up in the morning after a fairly sleepless night to discover that water had seeped into my daughter's bedroom, Edie's bedroom, my youngest daughter's bedroom, and that was it. I had, which was probably there and then most likely, a panic attack. I was breathless, dizzy, just hyperventilated. I was a bit of a mess. In the hours that followed that day, I just became more and more anxious. We contacted the roofers immediately, but the damage in my head was kind of done, really. Something snapped, and I went to work. I was due to attend a meeting a rather large meeting at work, but I couldn't stay. I had to leave that meeting. Because during that day I was just so incredibly anxious. My thoughts, my mind was just constantly reliving the experience. I was catastrophizing. And a few hours later, after leaving the meeting and going for a walk, I found myself stuck mentally, as it were, in my car. I was going to go home, but I couldn't do it. I was just stuck at the steering wheel in my car, crying, sobbing. I couldn't work out where to go. I didn't want to go home. Obviously couldn't be at work, and I couldn't stay put in my car. This fear of returning home to face everything that was happening was just too great, too overwhelming. I'd had mental health breakdowns in the past. This was probably my third, actually, in my lifetime. And I knew what was coming. I think even though this was by far one of the worst mental health breakdowns I had, but I had this flavour. I knew what was coming, and I knew that I'd had enough. I couldn't go through it again. I didn't have it in me. I didn't have the strength. I just felt hopeless. I called my wife, and I pretty much broke down the phone, broke down the phone, wailing, crying, sobbing, wailing. I didn't know what to do, and she instructed me, as ever supportive as she is, to take one step at a time. And the first step was to meet. I was going to meet her at our GP surgery. During that appointment, I didn't do much talking at all. I remember thinking, as hard as it was, though, that within this appointment, I needed to be honest with the GP, and I needed to try and muster up the words to answer the questions presented to me, of which I did. I was having overwhelming negative thoughts of hopelessness, along with quite intense thoughts of self-harm and ending my life. I was referred to the mental health crisis team there and then. I was told to wait, and someone would contact me within 4 hours to discuss what was going to happen. What followed in the days to come was a very fast and frightening decline in my mental health, even more than I had already experienced. I shut down. I would go day to day, barely talking. I just about made it out of bed to take my daughter to school, as my two daughters were in separate schools at this time, so I had to travel about 5 miles or so to take my youngest to school. My wife didn't drive. And I think if I didn't have this responsibility, I probably would have just stayed in bed, if I'm honest. But at the same time, though, I couldn't bear to be in the house. All the roof work was still ongoing. There were also concerns from my wife and others about being left on my own, for fear of where my thoughts might take me. I had my first of daily visits and conversations with the mental health crisis team in the kind of days, weeks that followed, many of which, again, I just remained silent. I couldn't put into words how I was feeling. I just felt hopeless, a feeling of just utter hopelessness. It was truly a difficult and scary time, not only for me, but for my wife. My wife did her best to shield the children from it by stepping into the role of both mother and father. I tried to maintain an element of a mask in front of them, but it quickly became too hard. My own mother flew over from Jersey in the Channel Islands to support me and my wife as well, which I'm just so grateful for. I had a visit from a psychiatrist who prescribed me some very hefty medications that pretty much numbed all my thoughts. It was like a weighted blanket had been placed upon my brain. I spent a night in a mental health respite service. This was meant to be much longer, but being there pretty much made me feel more isolated and alone. And I pretty much begged my wife and my mother, it was a group decision to place me into this home. I was involved in that decision, so I don't blame anyone at all for that. I was included in that, but I couldn't stay there, so it was agreed that I would spend 5 nights or so in a travel lodge to just give me a break, some respite from being in the house. Though I had to vow, and I used the word vow, that I wouldn't harm myself or do anything, of which of course I agreed. These 5 days or so were hard, to say the least. And this period sort of went on. Any periods of rain I found myself being very distressed over. It was a very difficult time. But the reason I'm sharing all of this with you today, during this time, I couldn't meditate. If I'm honest, I didn't want to. I tried in the earlier days to do a metta bhavana at the Southampton Centre, where my spiritual friends all are. But I broke down. I just left. I couldn't do it. I would think about the Buddha, perhaps from time to time, but often my thoughts were so overwhelmingly negative, and the rational side of my brain I felt was hardly working. Any tiny thought or attempt at reassurance was stomped out by the powerful and intrusive thoughts of hopelessness and deep sadness, a deep sadness. The only thought of reassurance that sometimes would manifest was actually how everyone would be okay eventually if I wasn't here. People would recover from my not being here, my death. So how do we go for refuge? How do we go for refuge in this state? As busy people with responsibilities, maybe as fathers, as mothers, busy parents, or just busy human beings. Our lives have so much responsibility nowadays, and often there are people around us that depend on us. And how do we deal with all of this and fulfill our roles in life, whilst at the same time going through something like this and suffering so immensely? It's near on impossible to perhaps go for refuge in those states. Maybe we can't. I to a degree felt like I couldn't. But for me, in all this, there was an experience, as I mentioned earlier, of Sangha, and this is what I want to talk to you about. During this time, I had great support from my wife, who was honestly like a rock in so many ways, and I'm eternally grateful to her. Especially seeing as this wasn't my first breakdown. It was my third, like I mentioned before, and she's been there through each one of them. I also had messages of love and support from members of the Sangha, my spiritual friends, which was a great comfort. But there was a member of the Sangha for me that was there for me on so many deeper levels. The word help doesn't really cover it, but for the purpose of this talk, I'll use the word help, but it doesn't cover it really. This member of the Sangha that was really there for me, I'm going to give you his name. His name is Dylan. He completely epitomised what Sangha is in my eyes. Dylan and I had known each other ever since I joined the Sangha, but our relationship really grew and deepened after we went on a few retreats together, and certainly after I asked for ordination, he also has asked for ordination. So now we are more like brothers, really. We really are, and I love him dearly. Going back a bit, I remember actually sitting in my car after that initial GP appointment whilst my wife was waiting for my medication and the call from the crisis team, and I was just sat in the car with tears streaming sort of down my face, in this utter distress of knowing what was to come, thinking, I've been here before, but this feels so much worse, and I was scared of what's to come. Scared for Sarah, scared for my wife, scared for my family. So I simply, in that moment, I just sent her Dylan's number, and I just said, "You're going to need this." During this time, Dylan helped and supported me on so many levels. This man has this amazing ability to, by simply being present, of making me feel safe and held. He wasn't just there for me, but he was there for my family as well, in every sense. He was truly there in what we would say, in my eyes, in body, speech, and mind. He was there, he was present. He would sometimes arrive very early in the morning at times to simply be with me in the car, to help me drive my daughter to school, to where she needed to be. He would remain with me for the day, taking me out so I was away from the house, and would also give my wife some respite, who at this time had to take time off work as well to look after me. He would do little jobs and tasks around the house that needed doing. He'd communicate with my wife and offer support with her, visit me whilst I was in the travel lodge. He would be at the end of the phone of great times of need. There was actually one occasion following another period of heavy rain, after the roof works had been done. Actually, everything had been done, and this compulsion for me to go up and check the roof even after the roof had been done, to check that it was okay after rain. I went up to the loft and to check for signs of water, and actually, to my horrified discovery, there was still water coming in. We've later identified what the problem is for that through many periods of times of roofers coming back and forth. But at this time and this discovery, as you can imagine, I was just deeply distressed. This was around 7 a.m. It was, and in my response, I was just inconsolable. My wife just called Dylan, put him on loudspeaker, and laid the phone next to me while I was sobbing and crying, and he just talked. And then all of a sudden he came straight over, as he often did during these times. Sadly, like I said, this wasn't the only discovery of water following the completed works. This went on, and we had roofers back and forth a number of times as this leak persisted. And Dylan would always be there, each time, helping us all to feel safe and held in his presence. These are just a few examples. I could go on, but I just wanted to point out as well that this kindness and generosity shown to him by Dylan to me and my family is just in his nature. I don't feel he was doing this out of any form of obligation, or simply because he was part of the Sangha, so that's what you should do. It just comes naturally to him. It was an automatic response on Dylan's part. I found myself actually telling this story to another spiritual friend a couple of weeks ago, and he actually said it reminded him of the sutta, the case of dysentery. And for those of you that don't know, this story is about the Buddha who comes across a village whilst walking with his attendant Ananda, and they soon discover within this village a sick monk, and this monk has been left to basically fend for himself. As he's sick, he has dysentery, and he's left to himself, and the other members of the Sangha have deemed him relatively useless due to his illness. He wasn't able to contribute to the rest of the Sangha, so they left him. The Buddha and Ananda, stopped, and they cared and tended to the sick monk. They bathed him, tended to his wounds, and then the Buddha later confronted the rest of the Sangha and sort of said something along the lines of, all of you, you have no mothers, no fathers to look after you. If you aren't going to look after one another, who will? You have to look after one another. And that's really stuck with me, and it's true, and that's what, Dylan did. He supported me and looked after me in my time of need. And eventually, with Dylan's support and others in the Sangha, like I said, along with my wife, I've come out the other side. I'm reducing the medication slowly. I'm going to be starting intensive CBT. I'm back at work, and I've even booked my next retreat at Padmaloka, which I'm looking forward to. I've got a lot of work to do, but I'm confident about the road ahead, as I know I'll have my brother and my spiritual friends around me and behind me. So whilst Dylan didn't bathe me at all, that's one thing he didn't need to do, he did care for me on so many levels, and I and my wife do not know what we would have done without him, and I honestly and truly feel like I owe him my life. So my message is this: in today's world, we are often so busy people going from one thing to the next, especially if we have other responsibilities in our life. But if you can get on retreat, go to your local centre, meet others, meet other members of the Sangha. To other fathers out there, we have a couple of retreats for fathers a year at Padmaloka, who, we are immensely grateful to Padmaloka for supporting us to hold and host. And on these retreats you can meet other fathers and share unique challenges in a safe and supportive environment, without judgment. Share some of our unique experiences and difficulties and just be met with love. It's hard enough as it is to try and fulfill our roles as fathers and as husbands, let alone if we struggle with mental health too. But going for refuge is still possible. In fact, it's a must if we want to survive. It's a must for all of us. If we can't meditate, it's okay at this time. While we're going through this intense suffering, if we can't meditate, it's okay. If we're struggling to connect with the Buddha in some way, it's okay. But we can still go to the Sangha for refuge. We can go to our spiritual friends and they will respond. We can rely on them. We can rely on the Sangha in our time of need. Because after all, spiritual friendship, as we know, and I certainly now know, is most definitely the whole of the spiritual life. So that's my message. Take a leap, take a chance, open up to members of the Sangha, build those relationships, so that in our time of need, when the chips are down, we can go to our spiritual friends. Thank you for listening, watching this talk, and may you all be well. Thank you.